So picking up from the last video where you're talking about cohabitation, marriage rates are currently falling and cohabitation rates or living with an unmarried partner are steadily increasing in the United States. As of 2016, 7% of US adults were cohabitating. In 2012, 20% of adults aged 25 and older had never been married. In 1960, just to put this in perspective, only 10% of adults aged 25 and older have never been married. So that number literally doubled over the past 50 years. So this raises, again, a lot of important questions that sociologists are interested in exploring. One of the questions that kind of extends itself from these findings is marriage becoming less important to people today than it was in the past? And definitely what the data is suggesting and the research in this area is suggesting is that yes, especially for younger generations, marriage seems like less of a necessity to people today than it did in the past. In other words, a lot of couples today don't feel the same social pressures to get married that couples 30, 40, 50 years ago did. And as a result, we see younger people either postponing marriage until they get older in life or just not getting married altogether. And marriage rates are anticipated to continue to decline as society progresses. People today are waiting longer to get married and to have children than they were in the past. Today's average first-time bride and groom are older than at any time during U.S. history. So it's the average age at which a man first gets married in the United States today is currently 30 years of age, and for women that's up to 28. And again, those numbers were significantly lower in the past. So again, more evidence suggesting that couples are postponing marriage for a number of reasons. One is that the importance of higher education has definitely increased in society. So a lot of people are postponing getting married until they've completed their college degree. Also, a number of people are waiting to get married until they establish careers. Again, in the past, it was the norm for there to be this kind of male breadwinner, female homemaker, nuclear family dichotomy. But today, a lot of married couples have two breadwinners. Both spouses in a marriage are contributing to the income, and as a result, people are waiting until they finish their schooling and secure careers before they pursue a marriage. Also, a number of people today just simply feel more comfortable cohabitating and do not feel strong social pressures to wed. Once you get married to someone, there's this kind of unspoken societal norm that it's a union that's expected to last a lifetime. And what data is suggesting is that a lot of younger people are kind of calling bullshit on that. And they're recognizing that all relationships kind of have their ups and downs, and that a lot of young people don't want to feel like they need to be legally tied or bound to someone for the rest of their lives. So many people are choosing to just forego marriage altogether. And again, this trend is especially common in younger individuals. So as a result of this, another trend that's occurring in families is that fertility rates have consistently been dropping. The average number of children born to a woman during her lifetime are now lower than in the past. Currently, women in the US are averaging about 1.8 children on average. I know that sounds kind of weird to talk about 0.8 of a child, but that number is just the calculated average or the mean across all women in the United States. And although fertility rates are dropping, the United States still largely practices this construct of pronatalism. So pronatalism refers to a cultural value that encourages childbearing. So again, this is definitely lightening a little bit or lessening this pronatalist value, this idea that all women should have children and should reproduce. But there is still kind of this norm in our society today to expect that people are going to get married, specifically in man-woman couplings, and that these man-woman couplings are going to reproduce and have children. But that is lessening, and we see that in the declining fertility rates in the United States. Couples without children is another trend that's increasing in terms of family. In today's society, 1 out of 5 married women do not give birth. This is double what it was 20 years ago. So this is, again, another one of those trends that is becoming increasingly common fairly recently. Many people who choose not to have children do so to either pursue their careers, to pursue extra travel or leisure time, to save money. The financial expenses of having a child are increasingly high. So some people are just foregoing having children because they don't want to have that financial burden upon them, and or because they simply want to minimize stress. This is a quote from an individual who is in a marriage but does not have children, and this individual said, We are dinks, referring to dual incomes, no kids. We are happily married. I am 43, my wife is 42. We have been married for almost 20 years. Our investment strategy has a lot to do with our personal philosophy. You can have kids or you can have everything else. So again, another trend in families is that a growing number of married couples are opting not to have children altogether. And kind of tying this into our current situation, there's a lot of scientists that are arguing that this is actually good for society as a whole, as overpopulation continues to be a concern in our society, especially with the effects that it has on the environment and global warming. So some scholars are actually arguing that a growing number of families choosing not to have children can actually be a good thing or a functional thing for our society as a whole. Blended families are also becoming increasingly common in our society. Blended families are families whose members were once part of other families. So, for example, as divorce becomes more socially acceptable in our society, we see a number of families splitting up or another number of marriages splitting up after having children, and then those people getting remarried to other people who maybe previously had children, resulting in blended families. Of course, kind of the prototype for a blended family in the US history is the Brady Bunch, right? A man had 3 children of his own, woman had 3 children of her own, they got married and somehow formed this new family. So that was the first kind of mainstream media image of the blended family in the United States, because up until fairly recently, divorce and remarriage were somewhat stigmatized processes in marriage and family life, but it's definitely becoming more socially acceptable, which is resulting in an increase in blended families in the United States. However, blended families do somewhat have a stigma in our society, and again, we can see this in different media representations, the idea of like a wicked stepmother, right, or a gold-digging spouse who's just trying to leech money off of the other parent or the other spouse in a relationship, causing a lot of tension between children and parents as well. This idea that you're not my real mom or you're not my real dad and you never will be. So there is a lot of kind of tense dynamics associated with blended families because of these kind of tropes that we see portrayed in the media. Single-parent families also becoming increasingly common in the United States. About 30% of children in the US today live with only one parent, so that's significantly higher than it was in the past. And that has to do with both the increasing societal acceptance of divorce and the increasing number of children that are being born outside of wedlock as well. 85% of children of divorced parents live with their mothers. The majority of strain associated with single-parent households is derived from the increased likelihood of children in these situations to experience poverty. And we touched on this when we talked about social class a few weeks ago, and this concept of the feminization of poverty, the likelihood that a woman is more likely to live in poverty than a man, is largely associated to this trend in parenting, that women are predominantly held responsible as single parents in comparison to men. And since women, we know, get paid less than men in the workforce, and women are more likely to be single parents than men, it makes sense that women experience higher rates of poverty, and as a result, children raised by single mothers are more likely to experience poverty as well. So that's an important lesson to take note of here, and to really see how these different structures, gender, social class, definitely race playing a factor, and now family, all intersect in unique ways to impact systems of inequality, which is a really important way that we use our sociological imaginations to understand, again, how these seemingly individualistic choices or behaviors are really impacted by these systemic or these systems of social structures, right? Grandparents raising children, another trend that's on the rise in the US. It's estimated that approximately 5 million children are currently being raised by their grandparents in the United States today. Again, many of these children live in poverty. As you may remember, elderly are a particularly vulnerable population to experiencing poverty, again, as we talked about during social class. This style of parenting also comes about due to what's referred to as the sandwich generation. So previously, it was the trajectory of the family was kind of expected that a couple gets married, they have children, they raise their children, the children go out of the house and have their own children, raise them, etc. But what we're seeing a lot in contemporary society, especially as the average life expectancy is increasing, meaning the elderly people are living longer and requiring assistance in their later years of life, many grandparents will actually move in with their own children and actually help raise their grandchildren, right? So we see three generations of a family, children, parents, and grandparents living in the same household. And as a result, grandparents are contributing to taking a bigger role in raising their grandchildren's life than they were in the past. And this again extends from one of the realities that life expectancy has extended. So we see a growing number of people living later in years in life, but as they get older, they do require some extra care, some extra dependency. So a lot of times children can't afford the high bills of placing their elderly parents in nursing homes or assisted living facilities. So we see three generations of families living together. And this is also, this practice of extended families living together like this is more common in some cultures than in others. For example, in Latino culture, the practice of having grandparents, children, and grandchildren living in the same household together is a lot more common than in other cultural practices throughout the US. So let's quickly talk about parenting styles. In sociology, we typically refer to three different styles of parenting. There's authoritative parenting, which refers to parents who demand high levels of respect from their children, who kind of rule with a firm hand, but they are still warm and receptive to their children. So I think good examples of this parenting really stem again out of that kind of nuclear family model that was really heavily advertised in the media in the 50s and 60s, thinking of like Ward and June Cleaver from Leave It to Beaver, or again, the Brady Bunch, another good example. Parents that demand respect from their children, but aren't afraid to hug their children and, show them affection and love at the same time. Another style is permissive parenting, which are parents who place very, very few controls or demands on their children. These parents are typically very hands-off. They may be very nurturing and loving to their children, but they'll let their children get away with a lot. So I think a good example of this are many of the parents from the movie Willy Wonka, right? The parents that are kind of pushovers that will do whatever their children ask them to just because they don't want to say no to their children. And the last type of parenting is authoritarian, so not to be confused with authoritative. Authoritarian parents are extremely strict and punitive. They are not warm, show very, very little affection to their children. While they still love their children, they definitely don't communicate that love as much as authoritarian or permissive parents do. Authoritative or permissive parents do. And authoritarian parents expect complete obedience. So a good media representation of this would be, for example, Captain Von Trapp from The Sound of Music, very cold, almost military style parenting. So sociologists also very interested in better understanding parenting. What are the effects of parenting? Some questions that are raised are, should parents be held accountable for their children's actions? How do we distinguish a healthy parenting style from a destructive parenting style? I'm sure as you were reading or listening to these different types of parenting styles, you were probably thinking back, what type of parenting did I receive growing up? Were my parents authoritative, permissive, or authoritarian, right? And depending on your experience, that's probably the parenting style that you agree with most, right? Unless you experienced some form of trauma as a child during your parenting, then maybe you definitely distance yourself from that particular type of parenting. But sociologists are interested in understanding the best practices in raising children who are healthy, who have good psychological and physical health. And another trend that's gaining a lot of attention is same-gender couples in parenting. And one of the big myths or concerns that was out there was that same-gender couples were going to be awful parents because a child needs a man and a woman in a parent role for them to be successful. And there has literally been zero evidence, not a single study, that has proven that children raised by same-gender couples experience any deficits. In fact, a number of studies find that children raised by same-gender couples actually have increased levels of compassion and empathy for people. So if anything, it's an advantage to be raised by a same-gender couple in comparison to a disadvantage. And that's, again, what has been proven by the research and science in that area. Last trend to talk about is divorce, and this is important. A lot of people think that divorce rates have consistently been climbing for the many years, and you often hear that the statistic that 50% of marriages end in divorce. But that statistic really is not completely accurate. When it's saying that 50% of marriages end in divorce, it's actually comparing the number of divorces that take place any given year versus the number of marriages that take place in any given year. Now, this is problematic because obviously we would expect the number of divorces that take place in any given year to be a really high or large number, because that's taking into consideration not just the number of marriages that took place that year, but all of the people that have been married throughout the past that are still married at that time and are still getting divorced, right? So more realistically, today only about 16.9 out of every 1,000 marriages end in divorce. So that is really less than 2% of marriages will end in divorce. So you have to be really careful as social scientists now, as trained sociologists. When you're reading newspaper headlines in the media, you need to remember that those journalists aren't trained scientists. So oftentimes they come across a new study and they do what they think is their best job at representing the data in their own writing, but it's actually pretty inaccurate. In fact, married couples today are less likely to get divorced than they were 30 years ago.